Okay, good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to our 104th Reading Online Sport Economics Seminar, or ROSES Seminar. We're very pleased to have Cornel Nesseler presenting this afternoon, or this morning, or this evening, depending on where you are. Before he starts his presentation, I just want to say that, as you may have noticed in the email reminder I sent, we're filling the schedule for the autumn or the fall, depending on your parlance. So if you do want to present in the ROSES series, then please do let me know. I can send you the doodle poll where you can indicate your availability, or just get in touch and have a chat. It's good to have, if you have PhD students seeking to get practice in presenting, perhaps if they're going on the job market, then that's also one of the great opportunities that we've got with the series that's running each week. Or if you simply want to present yourself or have other ideas, please do get in touch. It would be great to have lots of presentations into the autumn, as hopefully the weather gets a bit cooler here in the Northern Hemisphere. Cornel is going to present a paper joint with Robert Durr and Carlos Gomez-Gonzalez, and the title is How to Reduce Discrimination, Evidence from a Field Experiment in Amateur Soccer. Cornel, please do take away your talk.
Thank you very much, James. So, hello everyone. It's great for me to be here today to present my work. I really enjoy this kind of research. Working on this paper together with Carlos and Robert has been great. I really learned a lot from this paper. This is, for me, not the first paper in this kind of area. I've done a few field experiments, and this is like a follow-up to stuff we've had before. So I'm going to go with you through my presentation, and I'm going to tell you first why it is interesting what we're doing, and then I'm going to go step by step through the experiment, because normally that's really important for economists. They really want to know what you're doing in your experiments. And then I'm going to guide you through the results. Okay, so wait, this doesn't work, so I have to click like this. Yeah. Why is discrimination important, or why is it important to find something against discrimination, or how to reduce it? Basically, because if you look at research, you find that discrimination is omnipresent. So all of you know this famous experiment in the labor market from Bertrand. So what they do is they contact employees in the US, and they use black or white sounding names in the US, and then they find that there are fewer responses for people that have a black sounding name. And this kind of experiment has been replicated many times, not only in the labor market, but also in housing and the sharing economy. If you don't know what that means, sharing economy, so the paper from Edelman et al., that is about Airbnb. So they used the same method as Bertrand, but the difference is that they apply to Airbnb. And J et al., that's really nice. They do it for Uber and Lyft. But also you find discrimination in online dating and obviously in sports. So with the same method. So this is really interesting, and it's important, and researchers need to find this. So we need to show where discrimination is present. But the next step should be, how can we reduce discrimination, right? So this is what we want to do in this paper. We want to examine one way how to reduce it. But obviously, we are not the first ones to say that this is important. So here you see a quote from 2 Nobel laureates, and they say, yes, it's really good to discover discrimination, but the next step should be using field experiments to find a way how to reduce discrimination. So I really like this quote because it totally fits what we're doing, because this is a good explanation why we want to find something that reduces discrimination. But as I said in the beginning, I also have, let's say, my positive, or not positive, but my personal explanation or motivation why I want to do this research. So I started with this a few years ago. So I had this first field experiment in Switzerland, and then we did it in 22 European countries. So we contacted amateur football clubs all over Europe, and we asked them, can I come for practice, with typical foreign or native sounding names. And here you see, I hope you can see my mouse here for Norway. Yeah, that yes, in Norway there is discrimination. And to be honest, it's not nothing. 10 percentage point, if you compare this to other experiments, this is quite large. So this is also my personal motivation why I want to find something that reduces discrimination, because here, obviously, we find that there is discrimination all over Europe. So what we do here in this paper is we perform a large-scale field experiment in Norway. And because you're here in the Roses seminar, obviously, it's in sports. So the context is amateur soccer in Norway. So why is an intervention necessary? First of all, because of what I just showed you 2 slides before. Amateur soccer, discrimination in amateur soccer is all over the place. And the second is from a paper that I really like. That's from Salma Musa in Science. If you don't know this paper, I can only advise you to read it. So what she does, she performed a field experiment, I think, in Syria. And over there, she let Syrian Muslims and Catholics play in the same teams. And she found that this has a positive effect on social integration. Obviously, there's a very different area, but still, it's an amateur soccer. So that shows that there are ways to increase social integration through football or through soccer. And we're not the first ones to use this method. So here is a very good example from Boring and Philippe. And this is in a different area. It's in education economics. But what they do is they give students 2 different choices. The first choice is that when they evaluate their teachers, they just tell them that in the years before, students discriminated. And in the second text, they tell students that specifically male students discriminated against female teachers. And they find that this small text, which is basically a low-cost intervention, has a huge effect on the evaluation of coaches, of teachers in education. So this is like a first example that shows you, yes, maybe an intervention like this can have an effect. So we're not the first ones to test a small-scale intervention, but in this context. And we work together with the Norwegian Football Federation, or we work together. So what they did is they sent an email to all amateur clubs, not to all, but to amateur football clubs in Norway. So this is a slide, if you don't come from sports, this helps you, but basically what's the Norwegian Football Federation? So it organizes all amateur soccer activities, almost all the leagues, even if you're an amateur football club in a university, most of them are organized through the NFF. So they provide a framework for most of the amateur soccer clubs in Norway. So what they did, they sent an email, a short text to amateur soccer clubs. Here is this text. I can basically summarize it for you. So this is what they sent to those clubs, I think last year in October, early October or November. So they asked coaches to stay open to everyone who's going to apply, or who everyone's going to come to an amateur soccer team, just to be open. And this letter also says, yes, you have already done a very good job, and we really appreciate what you have done as an amateur coach. Keep on the good work, but please be open to everyone. So this seems like negligible for you, maybe the content of the text, but I can assure you we have worked together with the Norwegian Football Federation on this text for a very long time. It went back and forth between us, the researcher group, and the Football Federation. And here you see the text in English. Obviously, the text was in Norwegian. It had the logo of the federation below it, and then the name of the representative. And this is not an email that coaches typically get. If you're an amateur coach in Norway, maybe they're going to contact you once or twice a year regarding some organizational stuff. But normally, they do not contact you. So this was really something that is present for a coach, because this is something very unusual. But not all the coaches in Norway received this email. because then we wouldn't have an experiment. So the Norwegian Football Federation sent it to a randomly allocated half of the clubs, and we used block randomization by state. So here, if you really look at the map closely, you see that yes, there are blue and orange dots all over Norway. So that means in all those areas, there were some clubs that received this mail and some clubs that didn't. Why did we use block randomization by state? Because we had different names and we didn't want some names to be overrepresented, or we didn't want that clubs that received the mail from the federation were overrepresented. So this is why we used block randomization by state. So we had two groups, the control group, which is clubs that didn't receive an email, and the treatment, these are the clubs that received an email. So the clubs received the email, and 2 weeks after that, we sent them a mail. And here you see the text of the mail. It's really brief. It's similar to what a coach often gets. So here we have the subject, which says training possibility, and then, hello, I'm looking for a new club. Do you think I could come and join a training session? Thanks. That is everything. And we have done this in a similar way before, but because we have done this experiment in Norway before, we rephrased the text a tiny bit. And the names obviously changed for every email. So what kind of names did we take? Here's a list. So you have Norwegian sounding names, female names here, and male names over there. And the three groups are not groups that we randomly chose. Those are the three largest foreign groups in Norway. So it should intuitively make sense, because you want to use names that are representative of the population where you live in. So this is why we took those names. So for Polish, Lithuanian, and Somalian sounding names. And then we asked students in Ålesund and Trondheim if the names sound Norwegian or foreign. And here you can see the response rates. And as I told you, I've done this kind of experiment in 22 other countries. I've only had such a response rate once for another country, and that was in Poland. So this is really high. For Norwegians, it's really clear which names are foreign sounding and which names are native sounding. So what we did then is we constructed professional Gmail accounts. For each name, one email. So it was like first name, last name, @ and then I think gmail blah blah blah.com for the exact thing that we had after the @ you have to look into the paper. But there's one limitation, and I'm telling you about this because it is important later on for the analysis. Gmail has an upper limit, and that is 500 emails per account per day. And because we sent 1,000 something, we had to, or 900 something, we had to split it to 2 days. So that means we sent half of the emails on Monday and the other half on Tuesday. But still, all of this, we randomly assigned the emails to Monday or Tuesday. So it wasn't like you're high in the alphabet, you're A on Monday, or you're in southern Norway, you're on Monday. No, we randomly assigned you to one of them. And what are we observing? So what is important for us? We wanted to know what the coaches respond to. So what do they say? So we have to categorize all the emails that we receive. And most of them are pretty straightforward. So they say, yes, you can come. Sometimes they say, yes, you can come. And then there's a but. And the but can be, but where have you played before? So which position have you played before? Or yes, you can come, but how far is it for you to come to practice? So I don't know the numbers, we will see them later on, but the most frequent responses are yes and yes, but. And whenever I send a paper like this out to review, the referee is always super interested in response no and no response. But there is a tiny amount of people that say, no, you cannot come to practice. So I think we sent out 967 applications, and less than 1% of them said, no, you cannot come. So what we do in the end is we put the positive responses into one, yes and yes but, and the negative also into one group, so that the dependent variable is binary. So for me, it's pretty clear that the negative response, if you get no response or a response that says, no, you cannot come, it's basically the same. In the positive response, you can argue a little bit, and we also control for this in our paper. So we make 3 different groups, yes, yes, but, and no, and see if this has any influence on our results. But we do not find that this is significant. So what did we expect? Here, that's really interesting because we had really different expectations. So shortly before we sent out the emails, we discussed it in our group. And I thought that it would have an effect, that we would find that this email increases the response rate to foreign sounding names, but I didn't know how large it would be. I imagine that it would have a small amount, but I remember that Carlos, for example, I think he expected a larger amount, so that the share of the people that got a positive response, whether or not they have a foreign or native sounding names, that this gap decreased and really decreased. I thought it would decrease, but not that much. So this is what they wanted to do. They wanted to decrease the gap between foreign and native sounding responses, so that the responses that people with a foreign and a native sounding name get. So they wanted to decrease this gap. And obviously, they wanted to increase the response rate for foreign sounding names. So it's like 2 objectives we had with us. And here I come to something that is for many people not that usual when you present something in economics. Obviously, because this is an experiment, we had to think about the ethical implications of our work. And we wrote them down before we started this experiment. We got an approval from the University of Zurich and we pre-registered our experiment. But still, what we did had 3 potential issues. And the first one is that the people that we contacted, they are uninformed about their participation. Obviously, the coaches we contact, they do not know that we contact them. So we once had problems with an ethical committee before. They said we have to tell everyone that they're participating. But obviously, this is not really possible. So here you have to weigh the positive and the negative effects of your experiment. And the ethical committee from the university, they agreed with us that it makes sense not to inform the participants. Obviously, this makes sense. So another thing that is a potential issue is that people are misled, because we are writing an email that says, I would like to come for practice, but actually, I do not want to go to practice to all of those clubs in Norway. So again, we are misleading, and this is problematic, but it's better than not doing the research. And the third point we have, but we only have this in the beginning, is that the data is not anonymized. So we have the email of the coach, and you could potentially know who this person is if you would have our data set. But once we included the response of every coach in our Excel file, we excluded and deleted the email of the coaches. So we do not have this anymore. We're not even allowed to have it. So this was the ethical framework, and we tried to work around and with it as good as possible. But still, obviously, because this is an experiment, it has issues. And I think it makes sense just to talk about them and mention them, because if you perform an experiment, there's no other way. So here are the results. So results mean I just give you an overview about the data we have. So we sent out 967 emails, and you see that the overwhelming majority is for males. So almost 81% of the emails that we sent are for male clubs or male teams, and 19% are for female teams. That's not because we excluded female teams. We had all the teams that exist in Norway, but there are just fewer clubs in Norway. So this is the reason why male teams are overrepresented here. And you see that the treatment group received about 48% of the emails. Why not 50% perfectly? Because, as I said before, we have block randomization by state. So in some states, we have 1 or 2 emails more for one group. So this resulted in 48% that got an email from the federation. And also you see that we have a bit fewer names for foreign sounding names and a bit more for native sounding names. So this is the third variable here. And lastly, we have different dates for the applications. That's what I said before. We have a Monday and a Tuesday. And now if you come from sports, the next question might be, what about the leagues? And obviously we control for the leagues as well, but we didn't include them here in the descriptive statistics because there are too many. I think we talked once about it, if we wanted to include them in the appendix. They might even be in the appendix. I'm not really sure about that. And here we see the individual responses. So all the responses to the applications. So here, any response, so that can be positive, negative, whatever, just you wrote, is 57. So in 57% of the cases, you get a response. So this is a yes. So no but included. So in 30% of the cases, you get a positive response. And in 26% of the cases, you get a yes, but. And here you can see that the negative response, as I said before, it's really tiny. It's only 9 out of 967 applications. So let's have a look at the results, okay? Let's see what the intervention gave us, okay? So here you see the results from, I don't know, a year, maybe 1.5 years of work. So this is what you see here. You see the bars for the control group. So here, this is the orange or yellow one. So they didn't get an email from the NFF. And here is the treatment group. And unfortunately, you can see that it did work, but not like we expected. So we see that the treatment group got more responses, more positive responses in both cases, but especially for native sounding names. So this is what we see here. So if a club received an email from the NFF, it really increased their response rate, but only for native sounding names and not for foreign sounding names. And if you remember what I said before, this really wasn't our intention. So we wanted to decrease the gap between native and foreign sounding names, so the gap between this one and this one, but we actually increased it. Okay, so because we are here in an economics seminar, I'm going to include the regression analysis as well. So first we control for foreign sounding name, and then from an email from NFF interacted with a native sounding name, and then email from NFF interacted with a foreign sounding name. Obviously, we include all the control variables. So this is what you see here. You see that foreign sounding names get fewer responses. And you see that an email from NFF interacted with a native sounding name gets more responses. So this is what I just said in the slides before. And this doesn't really change. Here you see the magnitude is really the same, even if we include all the control variables. So if we include that it's a male soccer team, or if it's an application sent on a Monday or Tuesday, also for league and region controls, this doesn't really change. And this is what we see here. So this is the analysis that we pre-registered when we did this experiment. So we pre-registered our experiment online and we said this is what we wanted to do. But because we got these results, we wanted to explore them a little bit further. And this was really important for us because right now we come to those three interpretations. The first one is that, okay, maybe we had a defiant response by the coaches, okay? So you get this moral appeal that says, yes, please be open. And then you say, no, I do exactly the opposite to what you want. So this, like, you could imagine that someone is just, let's say, overwhelmed maybe by thinking this is now political correctness. So there's like a defiant response. Then we have a second explanation, and there's a descriptive norm. So you as a coach You had no idea that there were people discriminating in amateur soccer in Norway when people are applying jobs. So now you know, and because of that, you're more likely to do it. So you're more likely to follow the norm. And the third one is that, okay, we have those non-discriminatory coaches, and now they are more open to everyone, but we only see it for the foreign coaches, for the foreign sounding names, for the native sounding names, because they've been open before, but now you only see it here. So we have three possible explanations, but we want to do some further explanatory analysis to see which one could be correct or what we find in our data. So here, if you don't come from Norway, I'm going to give you one example why what we are doing in the further explanatory analysis makes sense. So Norway is really rural or urban. So on the left-hand side, you can see a picture of Oslo, and on the right-hand side, you can see one from Norddal. So Norddal is really close to the Geiranger Fjord. Maybe you've heard of it. It's fantastic. So if you don't know what you're doing next year during the summer, you can go there. Really, really nice area. But as you can see, the left-hand side, it's really a city, and it's a big city, Oslo. There are many, many people living over there, but in Norddal, as you can see on the right-hand side, and also Norway has many places like this, there are not too many people. So we thought maybe our results can be explained in some extent based on these areas. And what we did is we looked at regions with less than 100,000 citizens and with more than 100,000 citizens. And we found really large differences. And this is what you can see here. So you see that if you have a, let's say, rural area or with less than 100,000 citizens, that the intervention had no effect whatsoever. So you got fewer responses if you sent this email out. And this is here, the control group again for native sounding names, and here for the treatment. And you see that contrary to what we wanted, we got fewer responses in both groups, while we wanted it to increase. And now if we look at the urban area, we find that this is completely different. So here we have regions with more than 100,000 citizens, and we see that the email had a larger effect. So for both native and foreign sounding names, while the magnitude is still larger for native sounding names, we do find that for foreign sounding names, there is an effect as well. So this is really counterintuitive for us and was really nice to see it in this additional explanatory analysis. But whenever I talk about this one, I say it is important to look at it, but we did not pre-register it. And also, when we randomized the data, we didn't randomize at this level because we didn't think about it before. It is really important what we find here, but still, this wasn't our first aim. Our first aim was to decrease the gap in general and to increase the response rate for foreign sounding names. So here we're trying to find an explanation why what we did didn't work. So here's a conclusion for our findings. So, as I already said, the intervention increased the response rate for native sounding names, but it did not increase the one for foreign sounding names. So exactly what we didn't want to happen. And then it increased the gap while we wanted to decrease the gap between foreign and native sounding names. So we can conclude, unfortunately and unexpectedly, I have to say, our intervention backfired. And here I have to say, even though we find that our intervention didn't really work, it should be, let's say, like a starting point. I really think that these interventions, low-cost interventions, working together with football federations or other people in the sports sphere is really important because, as I said before, we do find discrimination all over the place. So it is really important that you find a way how to decrease this. What are possible ways? I've discussed it many, many times with my colleagues. I've discussed it with my previous PhD supervisor, Helmut Dietler. I've discussed it with Carlos and with Robert. So I think one interesting example comes from a completely different area. So here's the paper that I would like to talk about a little from Gottschalk et al. I heard it a few years ago. What they do in an experiment is that they have someone or a few people that go to the dentist, but they know before they go to the dentist that they don't need anything from the dentist. So their teeth are perfect. So they still go there and they want to see who gets, which dentist tells them to get treatment anyways. Why am I talking about the dentist now? Because we write an email to all of these clubs, but maybe it would also be interesting to go to those clubs directly and see how the response rate will change then. There have been other researchers who have called clubs, but it's really difficult to get an ethical approval for that. But I'm just saying, in future research, maybe there's a different method that gets us a bit closer to finding an intervention that might work, or a method that is closer to reality. So it is in fact the case that most players contact a new club by email, but in a few cases, players also go there or call a coach. So this is very interesting for future research. And for me, this is one of the very few times I've done this before, but this paper has been published already, so I'm really lucky. Normally, it takes me ages to get papers published. With this one, we had a few desk rejections in the beginning, but here for this paper, we had great referees. They really gave us super feedback. It was really helpful, especially to find an explanation to why this intervention didn't work. So if you want to check out the paper, feel free to do so. And now I can just say thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Cornel. Congratulations on your publication. It's not usual, we don't normally have published work in this series, but it's great to have it because it's a really interesting paper. So thank you for a really clear presentation. I'm going to open up to any questions and comments that people have. Johan was first by a split second, so go ahead, Johan.
Thanks, Cornel. That was really good. So congratulations on publication. So I suppose a couple of comments, obviously not needed really since you've already got it in. But one thing I was thinking, because you've got about 20% of your sample, which is female there, I'm wondering if you check to see, or maybe something we can do in future, whether the positive responses or influences the female clubs more than potentially the male clubs. That was one thing I was thinking. And the second, the randomization by the Norwegian Federation should probably take care of this, but I know with amateur clubs, normally you get kind of diasporas forming together. So I know like locally where I am, you get say FC Calcio, which is specifically a Sikh club, or say Leicester Italians, which is catered for a specific demographic. I was wondering if you had those in your sample and whether or not you get different kind of, well, just looking at those, whether you omit them and you get different results, or whether you find more tolerance in kind of teams that are more naturally more ethno-linguistic, have more ethno-linguistic fractionalization or something like that in those lines. So maybe that's for some future work since you've published, but good job, well done.
Can I comment on that?
Yeah.
Sure, yeah, sure thing, yeah.
Yeah, okay, so first of all, very good comments, very attentive. So we interacted, I think, just for fun, female clubs and the intervention, but we didn't even interpret it because I think we had 90 in each group, and then we have the four different or the three different foreign sounding groups. So we didn't interpret the results, we just included them in the total sample. But in general, if you write an application for a female team, you get more responses. But to be honest, maybe one of my co-authors knows, but otherwise I have to check in the paper because I think we mentioned it somewhere. I think the intervention didn't help for female clubs as well. And regarding your other comment, so in Norway, there are a few teams. I don't know if this really is an answer to your question, that are built by, let's say, foreigners within the country. Does this go into what you're interested in? So, like, let's say, like, for example, you have a Bosnian club in Oslo. Is this what you're wondering about?
Yeah, so I was thinking, so like where I am locally, there's a lot of kind of small clubs based on different diasporas. So like, can you get the Italian, then you get the Sikh teams and so forth. So obviously I was just thinking naturally they'll be more open. So maybe that's something for your future research if you look at the UK.
Yeah, you need a bigger sample for that, because we looked at this as well, and a referee had the same comment, but there are not enough clubs like that in Norway. I think you have about 20 or 25, but not more than that.
Yeah, I think the randomization might take care of that anyway by the federation, so you'd hope they do it equally. But anyway, good job anyway. Thank you very much.
Thank you for your questions.
Thanks, Johan. Now, the next person who's got their hand up, their name is in Cyrillic, so I don't know actually who it is. So whoever it is, please go ahead and ask your question.
Hi, Cornel. Can I ask you a question? It's Dmitry.
Sure, Dimitri.
Yeah.
Hi, Dimitri.
Cornel, do you have some information on the distribution of foreign citizens across different states in Norway? Because can it be an explanatory factor in this difference?
Dimitri, were you one of my referees for this paper?
No, I wasn't.
Because it sounds really similar to what one of the referees asked us. So we included, I think we controlled for the number of foreigners living in a region. So we controlled for that. And in another paper that we did in Switzerland, we controlled for the number of foreigners living in the postcode. It didn't change the results. So Carlos, he would like to do in the future, you would like to look at the number of foreigners in your team, but this data is really difficult to get. But regarding your question, yes, we did do that, but it didn't have any effect.
Interesting. Thanks.
Thanks, Dimitri. Sorry I couldn't recognize your name. Good to hear from you. Any more questions and comments? In the space we've got, I guess one kind of it is kind of flippant. A question I was thinking was, obviously you say that the experiment backfired, but you don't know the actual number of enrollments. I presume you only know there's this kind of hypothetical idea of somebody, this person whose name you made up and you emailed about. I don't suppose, given you've got links with the Norwegian Football Federation, whether you've got any actual information on football enrollments by different ethnic groups in Norway over the time period?
So we do not know anything about the composition of the amateur soccer teams in Norway. So first, this is unfortunately confidential data, and we really wanted to have it because it would have been interesting for us to control for that. I mean, it's super interesting to know if, let's say, you have a team and 10 out of 11 players in this team are already foreigners. This would be very interesting, right? But they couldn't give this information to us. And I'm not sure if they do have this information any longer. We discussed it for, I don't know how many times in our group. We thought about looking at pictures from the amateur teams. Maybe you find some information in there, but then you have the question about second generation immigrants, and you have to make some decisions that make zero sense because you have to say someone looks like that. So I assume he's a foreigner, and we didn't want to do that. So we know that there's some data available in the federation. We cannot get it, and it would be great to include it. So it's a good question, and this is really a line of future research.
But at least it means you don't know for certain whether your experiment backfired or not, though.
Yeah. At least it didn't have the result that we expected.
Yeah. Any more questions and comments? Okay, well, Dimitri's giving some applause, so that's probably a good point. Some team's applause, that is, which we can all do. We've got reactions and applause. That's raised hand. applause. There we go. So there's some applause from me as well, Cornel. Thank you very much. It was a really very interesting talk. And again, congratulations on your publication.
Thanks a lot for inviting me. It was really great.
Welcome. As we wrap up, a reminder that if you want to present in the autumn or in the fall, please do get in touch. I will, there's a link to a doodle poll where you can share availability if you're interested and keen on presenting. We're going to have one more talk next Friday. Alex Cardassi from the University of West Virginia, blaming the ref, understanding the effect of unexpected emotional cues on family violence. And then we'll have a break for 2 weeks, of which one of those weeks is the ESEA conference in Helsinki. So on that note, thanks very much, everybody. Great to see everyone. Have a great weekend and see you all hopefully very soon.